But there was still a company of archers that held their ground among the burning houses. Their captain was Bard, grim-voiced and grim-faced, whose friends knew his worth and courage. He was a descendant in long line of Girion, Lord of Dale, whose wife and child had escaped down the running river from the ruins long ago. Bard took the lead after the attack on Laketown and ordered things as he wished. He had a hard task to govern the people and direct the preparations for their protection and housing. Probably most of them would have perished in the winter, but help came swiftly, for Bard at once had speedy messengers sent up the river to the forest to ask the aid of the king of the Elves of the Wood. My Gavan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Marach here, Galadert, and head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to another faction overview video for version 4 of Divide and Conquer, today dealing with Dale. As of recording this episode, which is the 6th of March, version 4 is still not out, 2020, but it is drawing nearer. But as I say, we're dealing with Dale. So let's kick off with their starting region size. Well, Dale is, I would describe as a medium region size, because you get 4 provinces. As you can see from the map, we are at turn 2. The auto expansions have already kicked in. These apply to the AI only. I mentioned that because someone mentioned seeing the Northern Dunedain having more than 1 province at game start and thinking that's awesome, but remember, you as a human player would not get that. But Dale have 4 regions to begin with: Dale, Esgaroth, Grasgard, and Burkaupis. In terms of an army size, you haven't really got much going for you. Dale itself has a reasonable garrison, 4 units, including Gimli in a different role. Esgaroth has 3 units, 2 of which are actually quite good, Dalian Ordman and Dalian Longbowman. Note that Dale's are mostly militia. Grasgard has militia as well, along with Bjarn. And Burkaupis has militia as well. You also, in terms of an army, get this little fort over here, where you will find Prince Brand, your faction heir, with your strongest army, really. So you've got a reasonable amount of troops, but nothing that you're going to be overpowering anyone with, and it's certainly not going to be able to take Erebor or Thranduil's halls on turn 1 or anything like that. Your custom generals, if we go through then, so your faction leader is of course King Bane, and he stands in here, and he does have a custom strategy model. This is unique to whoever is your faction leader. So if we pull Vidasith out of Esgaroth, you will note this is a generic Dale general. This is your faction leader. So you can always see him on the battle map. No matter who it is, they'll look like that. So if Bane dies and someone takes the role, they will look like that. King Bane himself comes with Royal Guardsmen, who are just your bodyguard unit, I believe. So not actually a unique unit there. Vidasith, who's quite the defender, comes with Laketown Pikemen because he is the sort of Lord of Laketown. And you can note that there in his retinue. If we move further afield, I think these ones also just have your standard bodyguard, which again is the Royal Guardsman. He has Royal Guardsman as well. And then lastly, Prince Brand comes with Hearth Guard, if memory serves. Yes, there they are. Unfortunately taken on a snowy backdrop, so it looks a little bit like the pixels are missing or the texture's missing, but it is just snow. The Hearth Guard are one of your best units, as we shall see in the second half of the video. They are an absolutely fantastic unit. They have armor-piercing black arrows, which is really useful, which means obviously their bows are armor-piercing. He is easily your best general, considerably better than obviously King Bane and your standard retinue. I'm not really sure why Bane doesn't have a custom bodyguard unit. Maybe it's just overlooked, but he doesn't, unfortunately. So those are your 2 custom generals, Vidasith and your faction heir Brand. Speaking of faction heirs, let's look at the tree. You start with King Bane. Obviously, he's married to Wedwin, an interesting name, and Brand is the son. Brand's 20 there, Bane is 46. Everyone in the game lives to be about 150. Now, there are 4 turns per year, so you will note that that is 600 turns for someone to go from being born to dying. And so it is. You will have to play for a very long time to have anyone die, really. Very few generals actually start that old, so you've got a bit of a head start. You'll note that Halwood is also part of your family with his son Bjarn, because he is married to Matilda, who is Bane's sister in this little fictional universe. Bane also had an older sister called Sigrid, but she's dead. Not really sure why she's dead. I don't think I actually set this tree up. Maybe I did a long time ago, but in any event. Now, the reason that this icon here exists, if some of you are wondering, at any time your generals die, they will have this generic gravestone icon. And that is so that individual nations within the cultures can have their own set of portraits. And you share a portrait with Bree, you share a portrait pool with Bree, but Bree have been segmented off and have their own portraits. So everyone in this culture, which is Northmen, have to have that gravestone effect. But that is your family tree and whatnot. So turning to the area then, Dale of course has quite a long and thin region. It is quite a walk from your capital, which produces most of your forces, down to your front line at Bur Calpis. Geographically speaking though, you've got the Khanan defending you all the way down till it meets the Kelduin. No, other way around. I always get these two rivers the wrong way around. This one is the Kelduin, the river running, and this one is the Khanan, the red river, or red water. And the only point that you can cross this, as you can see, is here in Erland's Ferry. So you can get across there and there. Otherwise, the next crossing point is all the way up just south of Laketown. So you've got all of this protection along there. This one is Erland's Ferry, just here with the mountains in the crescent shape. Otherwise, though, geographically speaking, features, you've not got too many to protect you. Of course, you've got Mirkwood, which will hinder any advance from Dol Guldur if they are being funneled up and coming to Esgaroth, because, of course, trees massively slow down armies. So if the enemy is actually coming for you, they will avoid the forests and you get a nice sight range of them as they sneak up that side gap just there. Otherwise, though, as I say, mostly open plains are all around where Dale will be doing most of their fighting. The rebels around you, there's one province to the north there, Bergram, Gram of Old. You can take that before the dwarves arrive at it. You'll note that it's a castle. Castles have that kind of design. Have I got a Northmen town somewhere? There we are, Northmen town. You normally can quite easily see the Elite Dwarfs campaign strategy models are fan-bloody-tastic, and you can quite often see at a glance, which is the whole point of them, that that's a castle or that's a town, and it has always worked very, very well. On Nazanar is another classic example. Quite clearly a fortress over a town. So you could take for Bergram, but of course most people will first of all get Bermalinge, because that leads you on down into these three rebel-held regions, Gazar Barach, Erland's Ferry, Gazar Guel, and then further afield to Gazar Ibar, all the way down on the northern shores of the Sea of Rune. Custom battle maps, you have two, of course, Dale and Esgaroth. Now, Dale's custom battle map, really, the feature, the uniqueness about it, is that Erebor is in the background. But it is slightly easier to defend than most, because as you can see on the campaign map here, there's this sort of rocky island with a bridge going up to the gate, and the battle map is very much like that as well. So it's quite an easily defensive battle map, which is nice. And Esgaroth is similar, of course. Esgaroth, when you turn off the... making it blend slightly better with the terrain around it, it has created a sort of lake effect, but when you zoom in it's quite noticeable. But Esgaroth is a very easily defended one as well, because the enemy can only come across one bridge. Oh, sorry, my voice broke. So you can line up and shut them down from getting to the city centre. But those are the only two custom battle maps. Erebor, of course, is custom. Kirikathol is custom. Outside of that, you're a long way off from anywhere that else is custom. Oh, Thranduil's Hall, sorry. So if it's custom battle maps you seek, you will likely have to attack your own allies. But as we'll touch on in a moment, you may not want to do that. Speaking of allies then, you start allied with the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, the Dwarves of Erebor, the Vale of Dorwinion, and the Woodland Realm, which is all very nice indeed. And you start at war with no one. You are not at war with anyone. So even Rune and Dorwinion, if you wish to, you could break with Dorwinion and side with Rune. That's an option that's available to you. But of course your chief enemies, dealing with who is around you, your chief enemies will be Dol Guldur, who will come up from the south in time, and Rune, who will also come up from the south in their time. They probably won't present too much of a challenge though, as we'll discuss slightly later on when I rank the faction. Because it takes them a little bit of time to get to you. Also note that in this version, in version 4 and in version 3, were Gundabad added in version 3? I can't remember. But Gundabad, of course, now exist, so they will be coming through the mountains too, but the dwarves often keep Gundabad more than busy enough, so you might have to worry about them. Now, moving on to economy, Dale has an interesting little feature at the start of the game in that you lose money heavily at the start of the game. And it is absolutely paramount that you just set your nation up a little bit. Get ready to rebuild and respec and just to start making some money. You are a very, very poor faction. but you have the potential to be a very, very wealthy faction. You are one of the few nations in the game that, of course, gets the second tier of the Merchants Guild, which means you get a merchant, and he'll be making you a lot of money. You get the trade route building, which are fantastic for trade. They are absolutely excellent at bringing in money. Not only do they give an increase in tradable goods, they also have a fixed income, which is really very useful. But not only that, they also, well, it's really annoying, but increase in tradable goods actually covers 2 types of tradable attributes. Now, one of those trading attributes just gives you, if memory serves, a sort of flat percentage boost to your trade, and the other is an overwhelming powerhouse of financial gain. And the only buildings in the game that have it, I do believe, are the trade routes. It used to be reserved for the caravan line, the caravan building line. I can't remember in the coding the actual line, but it's a slightly different take on a trade boost. And as I say, it was present in the Caravanserai. Is that how you say that word? The southern nations used to get. And this, in fact, is that same building. Just respect. I can't remember if it's hard-coded. But anyway, ignoring all of that boring side stuff, just note that this is the best economic building that you can really get for the cost and the time it takes to build. So really go ham on your trading posts, exchanges, and plazas. They make a lot of money. You, as a nation, as a general faction, if we move to Grasgard, you can get all the way up to Large City, which is the highest, if memory serves. Is Huge City the one that's locked off? I think it is. Yes, Huge City is custom. So you get all the way up to Large City, which is the biggest that you can get. And down the castle line, you also can go all the way to Stronghold as well. So you're not restricted in any way. You just start off losing a lot of money, and it's up to you to just sort of turn that around a bit. It's just a tiny little hiccup you've got to overcome. Your diplomat comes out of Dale. He comes out of the Palace of Girion. And there he is, the diplomat there. In terms of ships, you are a nation that gets ships. You get the human boat, which is called a longship in the game. It is the worst of all the boats. You only ever get that one, and the boats are only trainable out of a few select towns along in this sort of area. So not every port on the River Running or indeed on the Sea of Rune will train boats, but almost every port on the actual sea will train boats. But we just try to restrict the amount the AI builds wasteful boats here in the Sea of Rune, because of course they are just a drain on their finances. So we try to stop the AI building them. So there's not as many ports down the river will actually train boats. But just note that you do get boats. Now, I can finally talk, after all this time, about, if memory serves, the... Oh, no, hang on. Or are you that also don't get it because of the dwarves? No, you are. Curses. I can't talk about the advanced blacksmith because you don't get an advanced blacksmith. Because of your link to the dwarves, you already get an blacksmithing boost elsewhere, I believe. I don't actually think you do get a blacksmithing boost. I just think you simply don't get the advanced blacksmith. And our reasoning was something to do with dwarves. There it is, dwarven chainmail. You don't get an advanced blacksmith because you get the benefit of the advanced blacksmith anyway. You don't have to build an extra blacksmith. You get your links with the dwarves are shown in your blacksmithing already. So Dale, once you build your 3rd tier of blacksmith, it just gives you more benefits than anyone else. So don't worry about the advanced blacksmith again. It doesn't exist for Dale. Just your blacksmiths give you an extra boost, a nice dwarven boost. Now, speaking of the dwarves, that leads us into gameplay events. And or the scripting side of things, and Dale only have one script, I'm afraid, and you've already seen it slightly when I right-clicked on the Palace of Girion, because you could train Erebor Infantry and Woodland Scouts. Now these 2 unit types, and then some later on as well, are only available as long as you are allied to Erebor and the Woodland Realm. As soon as you break those allegiances, then those nations will abandon you. And the troops are no longer available. You can still, I think, use the ones you've already trained, but they might be deleted as well if memory serves, actually. And then until you ally with them again, you can't train their troops again. There is a message that pops up at the very start of the game to tell you that. But all the troops train out of the Palace of Girion, so they only come from one location. Previously, they used to also come from the Castle and Town Hall line, but they don't anymore. So it is purely the Palace of Girion that trains them, because you will note your militia units come out of your town hall, and we'll cover your militias slightly. We'll go over your militia, of course, in a moment. So that is the only script that really affects Dale, other than this, where you start the game with a lesser, with a very poor economy, and you've got to spend a few turns just setting up. And of course, the minor extra feature that your blacksmiths give you, dwarven chainmail, straight away. You don't have to build an advanced blacksmith. So you get a bit of a blacksmith bonus. If I could say blacksmith more, I bloody well would. So Dale, quite a simple one, I'm afraid. But one thing I did just want to show you, because it only happened very recently, the green books are indeed now set up in terms of regions. They're not all yet set up in terms of faction capitals, because the Dale one would have the Dale information. But just note that here, now this is primarily useful now for unit restrictions. So if you ever get a unit that says requires grassland or requires forest or whatever, then simply right click on the green book, have a read if you want to about the region, and then it will tell you each region that shares that book and what type of ground type they are, or what ground type they have. So all 4 of the Dale battle books are grassland, which is Plains of Arafeld, Carnan Fields, Grammervold, and all the way up at the Realm of Dale. The green books cover the whole map, so if you ever need to know what type of terrain that region is, right-click on the book, because they're not always obvious. These are perfect examples. These regions have some trees. You'd be forgiven for therefore thinking maybe they're forest. Bergram, for example, has some of the foothills of the Iron Hills, so you might think maybe this one is mountainous. But no, they are all grassland. It's primarily useful for Barren, the resource Barren, and I come to Mengelen to show that off because the Downs are a barren region, but of course, looking at the map, they are 50% forest and 50% mountainous. Note that mountainous is any type of hill, so it won't literally just be the mountains. It will also be regions that have prominent hill lines or are known for their hills, like the Weather Hills, for example. But anyway, you can find those all out in the green books. So then we come on to Dale's difficulty, and without absolutely any forethought whatsoever, I'm confident in telling you that your difficulty is a 1. Easy, 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 and the reasoning is thus. Erebor will deal with Gundabad. You will not have to worry about that. The Anduin Vale and Woodland Realm will deal with Dol Guldur. You will not have to worry about that. The Dwarves and Dorwinion will stall Rune for a very long time, and you will not have to worry about that, which of course means you won't have to worry about literally anything, because there's no one to threaten you. You have as long as you like to build up your military and your economic powerhouse. And so when you finally do decide to get involved in a war, you will be nigh on unstoppable. So it is a very easy campaign. We've sprinkled in some difficulty with the economic ruin at the start, but it's really easily resolved. There's forts around your capital. You make sure you use those. And of course, you'll be swiftly claiming lands. So Dale is it's a very easy campaign. It's a very, very easy campaign. And that is why it's quite easily a 1 for Dale. So without anything to read in the jump over to the battle map, we will just jump over to the battle map, because that concludes Dale's campaign side of things. I don't think I've forgotten anything. So we shall jump over and see what your army looks like. Welcome then to the battle map, and a quick overview of Dale gives us the quite clear indication that they are what we would call a well-rounded faction. There are plenty of ranged options, plenty of infantry options, and a reasonable enough amount of cavalry to suggest well-rounded, as I say. Note again, as ever, the barracks event is somewhere in amongst all of this, but these are all just lined up according to their tiers, so if some of them come before the barracks event, you're just lucky. So, the very first unit that you will likely train the most of are the Northmen Militia. Now, they have, since previous versions, been given a little bit of a hike over in terms of how they look, courtesy of Theodore, and his mod on Mod DB. I believe it's called Rise of Numenor. I'm fairly certain that's where we got the model for this one from, and to him we are very grateful. And it gives them a very, very Slavic, should I say, sort of vibe. That's the feeling one gets when looking at them. They used to be called Dale something. I can't remember, but anyway, they're a flank infantry, and an early tier flank infantry is always very, very helpful in my opinion, or strike infantry as we should call them. Their attack is 4, which is quite low, but they are effective against armor, which is fantastic. But their defense is terrible, so really do attack the flanks. Do not keep them in battle, they will die. Their morale is not very good, and their morale response is very poor. They like fighting in forests, the winter time, and they don't like fighting in desert or barren. That needs to sort of be changed, really. They don't like fighting in barren regions. No, because that one is actually dependent on the ground type. So they don't like desert, so you won't do very well if you go down into Harad. They are very, very cheap, though, but I can't show you because it's they're a mercenary. But they are cheap. You get a lot of them. They are excellent flank infantry. Terrible if you try and hold the line. Supporting them are the Rivermen, who throw javelins. Now, their missile attack is 7, which isn't that good for a javelin unit in truth. But javelin units are always helpful if used well. They're good at softening up an enemy before better units charge into them. Their melee attack is quite poor when they've stopped, and they will need support from better troops. Not a particularly good charge, and their total defense is only 4, so they will die quite easily. They are proper militia in that they aren't really that great. But they do get a bonus against mounts, because javelins always get a bonus against cavalry. You get 3 missiles, you have a 55-meter range, and they require a northern river region, which just means basically all of Dale and anywhere that borders on either the Carnan or the Kelduin. So they are quite readily available. It's a lot of provinces that are covered. In keeping with the brown theme, the last of the 3 browns are the Northmen Archers, and they are a militia crappy archer unit. So melee attack is 2, the total defense is 3. They will die very easily to either enemy arrow fire or any kind of melee. Their own missile attack is only 3, but 3, to be honest, is actually quite good. They are good archers because there are 177 of them all doing 3 damage. That's thrice as good as the trash of any of the enemies you're likely to fight, except for Rune. Oh no, that's a lie, because Gundabad get good archers as well. So you'll outclass Dol Guldur archers, but you'll struggle against Rune in the early tier. But then you are an archer-heavy faction. You do have more of an archer-leaning than most other nations, so you'll come into your own a little later on. Moving up then to your proper tier, we'll start with the Ravanian Gadrots, because they're a little bit of a mix and match. No, we'll actually end with them, because their stats are a bit different. We'll start with the Dalliance Ordman. So this is your proper dedicated unit, and they're only just about as good as Gondor militia, so that's how you're sort of a tier behind. Your secondary unit is as good as Gondor's starting unit, so you're not a particularly heavy military nation. But note their morale is better and their response is better. You haven't got any kind of movement speed buffs really for that many of your units. You aren't renowned for your fighting prowess, and that is what we're trying to show. But they are quite cheap, so at least you can get quite a few of them. Remember, in terms of recruitment cost, generally speaking, when you're thinking of how much upkeep they will be, a rough guide is to just halve the recruitment cost, and that's likely to be the upkeep. Although it's a bit more, the graph is definitely not linear. In truth, the cheaper a unit, the more likely that the upkeep is probably either between 10 and 25% of the cost. But the more expensive a unit, the more likely that the upkeep is between 25 and 50% of the cost. But of course, that's overthinking it. Just right-click on your units when you're on the campaign map and you'll see. Next up are the Dalian Billman. They are an anti-cavalry unit. They are also effective against armor. They are a good unit. They have a halberd animation, though, not a pike one, so don't be expecting them to get amazing kill-death ratios. Halberds are just good spearmen, really. They cannot hold the line anywhere near as well as pikes, but they do get armor bonuses, and they're very good against cavalry. So they are an excellent cavalry killer, particularly, of course, some of the cavalry that Rune will throw at you, because it might be heavily armored. I'm thinking, of course, of the, are they Lok Innisrim? The cataphracts of Rune. But otherwise, the only heavy cavalry you'll really face is if you... Well, you won't really, unless you make it to canned. But that is a prospect, so they might come into their own then. They cost about the same as the Dalian Billman. We need to do all the melee before we move on. So then, as I say, the Ravanian Gadrots are in this section, but they're armor-wise, defense-wise, sorry, they're significantly better than the Swordman and the Billman, but their attack and their charge is very poor. So they're a very good unit at holding the line, but they won't really kill any of the enemy units. So they are the anvil upon which your cavalry will be the hammer. They will hold that line, but they won't really kill anyone. They require a Ravanian region, which just roughly aligns to... it's basically anywhere in the northeast, so they're quite readily available. Ugh, my headset has just run out of power, but it's alright because the sound is muted. Morale is average, and morale response is average as well. And again, no boost to the speed. They cost 690 though, so... The Billmen are your anti-cav killers, really. The Gadrauts are for holding the line, and then the Swordmen are better on the flank. Although none of them are fantastic at that, because their charges don't really reach into the high numbers. Then you've also got Dalian Longbowman, Dalian, call them how you will. They are your first really quite good archery unit because, of course, their missile attack is higher at 4. Their melee is still not that great when compared with the Northmen Archers. It's only 1 better. Their charge stays the same, but their defense doubles, and that's the key point. They will at least stay alive if the enemy shoots back, which is quite common, or indeed if the enemy reaches their lines, which is also quite common. So they will survive at least long enough for you to get support over to save them. But again, there's 150 of them, so that's a goodly number to do some solid damage to the enemy. And lastly, your first cavalry unit comes in at tier 2. They are the Dil Cavalry. This is also a unit you'll be familiar with if you've played as Erebor, because they're the ones you loan out to them. They are just an entry-level cavalry. They're nothing special. But 10 defense, 5 charge, 5 attack. They will run into the enemy very well, but do not keep them there because they will die. Their secondary attack is only 4, so they really are a rundown enemy unit. Try and break enemy units or just repeatedly charge. They will not hold up in combat at all. They will die very easily, but the morale is average, and so at least they won't run away too quickly. Then we jump up to your post-barracks event mainstream. We need to think of better names, really, don't we? So sort of militia, main, upper main, and elite is probably the best way. So upper main. I've never been to upper main, but I hear it's absolutely lovely in the autumn. First off are the Dale Swordmasters. These are an excellent flanking unit, strike infantry, and one of the more iconic strike infantry, really, because they've been in the mod for so long and they've not changed at all in all that time. They have a very high attack of 13, but no effective against armor, so there are strike infantry better. Their charge bonus is 7, though, which is quite nice, and a defense of 15 helps them stay alive once they inevitably, of course, get stuck against the enemy you charged them into. Infantry do not run away as easily as cavalry, so they will have to do at least some fighting, and the higher defense will keep them there for a while. Good morale and good morale response makes them much better for that task as well. And then you're also supported at this tier by the iconic Laketown Pikemen, who everyone asks for because they wear the armour that's seen in the Hobbit films, as do your bodyguards, as we'll see in a moment. But the Pikemen are your only pike unit. Unless actually possibly the Barding Herd might have been changed. Well, I don't think it did. I'm fairly certain these are your only pikes. So, of course, they're fantastic against cavalry. With pike units, generally speaking, triple the attack, and it gives you an idea of how much you're going to be doing. But with a 15 defense is fantastic, because pike units keep the enemy at bay, but every now and then they do take a hit. And so if they've got the defense to survive multiple hits, then they're just phenomenal. They're just monsters. And the Laketown Pikemen are very good, and it is useful to have a general that starts with them. Auto-replenishing pikemen are always handy. Good morale response. And again, the recruitment cost is not in the high. We're not over 1,000 yet, so you have a relatively cheap upper main tier. Supporting these two units then are two very interesting and iconic units. We'll start with the Barding Marksmen. Barding Marksmen are the first of your roster to really pack a punch with arrows. They're 30 missiles altogether, 200 meter range, 6 missile attack, 15 defense again, so once the enemy reaches them, they will be staying alive. That's again double what was before, and then some. Their melee attack is 7, so they're actually dependable swordmen when they finish with their bows. And as it says there, they are the backbone of the army. You want to try and have as many of these as possible because they do operate that dual function. They can fight as well as fire their bows, so do use them where you can. But they are slightly more costly. They are supported by a real dedicated archer, one of the first rangers we've seen now in these new overviews, the Athala Rangers. So rangers, something unique to most rangers is that they can hide anywhere. They often have a missile attack of 6 or 7, and generally speaking it's 7. It may have been knocked down for certain reasons. Rangers typically have the best range of any human archers, and they tend to have the best missiles of any human archers, and you'll note their accuracy is very high. Athala Rangers are also have a movement speed bonus of 110%. Every single Ranger is slightly different from each of the others. And that is why this one has a missile attack of 6, because they sacrifice missile attack, but they gain a movement speed bonus for that, and I'm fairly certain Athala Rangers have a slightly further range than other Rangers. They are the farthest firing Rangers, I think. It doesn't really matter if I'm wrong on those points. Every Ranger is just a slight variant in some way on all the others. They always have one stat worse and one stat better, or there or thereabouts. They are relatively costly, and you'll see there they only come from East Mirkwood to Dorwinion, so they are from the plains of Rovanion, but south of the Kelduin River and north of the Ered Luthui, between Dorwinion and Mirkwood. So it is quite a large area that they come from, but just not available everywhere. Also at this tier then, and finishing off your upper main, are the Iwothiadar Horse Guards. Now they had a very different role in Third Age Total War, and they've been respec'd to be Cavalry Archers, so again giving Dale a Cavalry spin, or an Archer spin, sorry, and giving you more of an Archer focus than perhaps I first suggested at the beginning. Iwothiadar Horse Guards are Archers predominantly, but they do still act as good cavalry once they've finished with their bows. Charging when they've still got arrows, often these units don't do very well, but if you charge once you've run out of arrows, they turn into just a dedicated charging cavalry, and they're very useful in that regard. They get a bonus against other mounts, so they'll be very helpful against Canned. They again require a Rovanian region, so they're not available everywhere. 28 missiles, 120 range, so you've got to get up close and personal. You always do with cavalry archers, smaller bows, of course. Their melee attack is 7, and their defense overall is 15, so not an absolutely outstanding unit, but cavalry archers are always very helpful if you're up against an enemy that has no range, because then you're not worried about the fact you've got to get up close, and your mobility is lethal. You can get right into the enemy's grill and shoot them down before they can ever do anything about it. So moving then to the final tier, your elites. We'll start with the Barons. Usually they used to be called Dismounted Earls, but I really dislike names that are just dismounted something, so I called them Barons. They are just heavy infantry knights, really. They inspire your forces, excellent stamina, but stamina's not really something to really worry about. They only come from Dale or Esgaroth, so very restricted, but their morale is very good, the first unit that has that. Their attack is 11, but their total defense is 24, which is fantastic. Particularly for a human unit, so they're just really dependable all-round units. They cost a lot of money, and they're quite restricted, so you won't see too many of them. They are supported by an excellent anti-cavalry unit, the Barding Herd. Now, as I say, I'm fairly certain Barding Herd have the halberd animation and not a pike one. But they are still very good because of their 7 attack that is effective against armor, which is fantastic. Bonus against mounts, 21 total defense as well. Very good morale response. They will hold the line for so long. They're one of the best defensive units that the game has to offer. And they are all Dales. You may have noticed there as well that they are not restricted in any way, so you can get lots of Barding Herds. Also at this point, did I mention on the Athala Rangers? No, they don't have it. No, indeed. The Hearth Guard are the first two. The Hearth Guard have, as we've seen before, the black arrows that are armor piercing. They actually have a visual effect where they have sort of a black trail on the arrows, just to show you. So their arrows are armor piercing. They aren't with their secondary weapon though, which is a spear. They are spearmen when they finish with their bows. But you note on their visuals that they have a link to the dwarves, which is very cool, in that they actually have dwarven shields, which I just think is very cool. They are far and away your best unit on foot. Because it's difficult to liken cavalry and infantry together. Very good morale response, 24 missiles, 170 meter range, only high accuracy though, so watch out for that. They get a specific bonus against the Cataphract Cavalry, so they're perfect for killing Rune's elites, if Rune ever gets to that point. They're also the only unit in your army that can place stakes, so whenever they're present, you get a key and useful stake placement. But do note that your general, so your faction heir who starts with Hearth Guard as his bodyguard, he will not be able to place stakes because the game, in its infinite wisdom, put the General's Horn ability in the same spot as the unit's standard special ability, which is just moronic. And there's so little to think about with these games, you wonder how they made that error. But they did. So any general's unit never gets to use the unique abilities of the unit it's attached to, because the general's ability overrides the unit's abilities, which is just a joke. But the Hearth Guard are fantastic, but they are very costly, so watch out for that. But you will note that they also only come from Dale or Esgaroth, so a lot of your power is in your heartland. And lastly, before we finish with the bodyguard, the Elves. Everyone knows about the Elves. They've been in the game since Third Age Total War as well. They've got nice bright cavalry, which is always nice. Their horses have interesting bardings, if that's the word, or barded. Are barded interestingly. I don't know the word. But they are just mounted versions of the Barons. So they inspire your troops. They get a bonus against other cavalry, which is handy. Their attack is 10, their charge is 6, but where they shine is their defense. 22 defense, that means even if they get stuck in battle, they'll at least survive long enough to do some damage. They're slightly slower than other cavalry because they're quite heavy, so they're not going to outpace the cavalry of Can, so watch out for that. But again, they only come from Dale or Esgaroth, so they are slightly restricted, and they're costly again at 1100. 1100. And lastly, your bodyguard, who is also an archer, the Royal Guardsman, and there they are in all their Hobbit splendour. Everyone really wanted Hobbit unit designs, but we didn't want to make the whole roster Hobbit, so we took this one for the bodyguard and the Laketown Pikemen and called it a day. These are effective against armour as well. They I think they are spearmen again when they finish with their bows, either spearmen or pikemen. I'm fairly certain they're spearmen. They get the black arrow, that's armor piercing. Their morale is very good. Their morale response is good. 24 missiles, 170, high accuracy. That's the same as the Hearth Guard. So they are very much a less armored version of the Hearth Guard, but also with slightly less attack. But otherwise, you'll note their stats are the same. Same missile, same charge, both effective against armor. Both have the same accuracy, range, and missiles. It's just the Hearth Guard are better when the melee is joined. So you want to keep these guys a little bit out from the fight, if you can. And that is the end of the Dale rosters. Let's line everybody up. Let's turn it all on. And then let us see who we are up against. So that concludes, as I say, the Dale roster. So let's go and have a little look as to who we might be fighting in the next episode. There's some cavalry out there on the flank. There's some infantry. There seems to be a heavy focus on infantry down the middle. There's a lot of red and black going on with this roster. There's always siege equipment because the AI always puts siege equipment in the army when you autofill the army up. I don't know why it does that. There's a lot of red going on, actually. It's a very heavy red and black theme as the first catapults fire off there into our lines of archers on the our east side. There's more cavalry again, which might be throwing many of you off because it is, of course, one of the game's quintessential heavy infantry factions, the coming Númenóreans from the far south, the Ardanaim, who are going to have a very interesting overview video because almost all of their roster has been redesigned since version 3 in one way or another. So much to discuss. Oh, some of the Faroon Mercs have somehow made it into their roster, into their army. I really like the Ardanaim. I think what we've done with them is really, really enjoyable, and they're a very interesting faction to play as, in my opinion. And I think they are coming to be something of a fan favourite faction as well. There's some of their royals, Narut Aru Household Guard. The cavalry that we've seen running around on our flanks are, of course, their heavy cavalry, the Narut Aru Royal Knights. And there they are in their fantastic golden splendour, courtesy, as I say, of the same gentleman that gave us the Militia for Dale, the Rise of Númenor mod. I'm sure it's called Rise of Númenor, and I'm sure he's called Theodore, but I could be wrong. It's a Mod DB mod anyway. And there they are up against Dale. Some of their new, very Roman-inspired shield and sort of general design there, which I am not against at all. And you just saw there some of the black arrows firing from our bodyguards. Let's zoom in and watch it again as you see the black trails on the arrows fire off, just so that you can differentiate on the battlefield what are your black arrows and what are your not. And those are the armor-piercing ones, smashing into the Abrazanim Nardubawib at the back there. Again, heavy Roman theme. I like the redesign of these units. They no longer have overt Mongolian tones and themes, so a nice change indeed. But that concludes Dale, so I do hope you've enjoyed watching this rambling of me, the mod leader, forgetting everything that we've done in the mod and trying to remember desperately in the seconds that I mention these things. We will be back, of course, next week with the Ardanaim's episode, and there will be some Isengard episodes to come. And then I do hope you also enjoyed the Lagerun Nazgul story that went up yesterday. Do post your thoughts on that video. I'm particularly interested in that video because it's the first of the Nazgul stories that I wrote. So I welcome your feedback. But for now, that is all. Thank you very much for watching, and until we speak again, Nevair Naden Pedemad Melunin, and farewell.